As tensions grew across the globe and the threat of national destruction grew ever larger, the United States government knew they had to come up with a contingency plan in case Armageddon would strike the country. In secret, a collection of high-ranking government officials, better known as the Enclave, began the development of a program known as Project Safehouse in 2054. Publicly, the goal of Project Safehouse was to establish a network of shelters across the United States to protect citizens in the event of national catastrophe. To achieve this, the government partnered with defense corporation Vault-Tec to construct specialized bunkers, referred to simply as vaults. These vaults were designed to keep their inhabitants safe until a specified date, at which point the vaults would open, allowing those inside to return to the surface and rebuild their once great nation. While many believe the vaults were a noble cause of protecting America's future, members of the Enclave worked in secrecy to corrupt Vault-Tec and twist Project Safehouse into a system of unregulated human experimentation underneath an initiative known as the Societal Preservation Program. Of all the vaults that were known to the public, only a handful worked in their intended manner, serving as control vaults against the other experimental vaults across the nation. These vaults were each subject to a number of different complications, ranging from the mildly mundane to the exceptionally lethal. In this two-part series, we'll be looking at every vault across the canon Fallout franchise, that's Fallout 1 through 4, New Vegas, and the television show, to discover their true purposes and the secrets that they contain. Now, this first video will not contain any of the vaults from the television show because I'm a fake fan and I haven't finished the show yet and I don't want to spoil myself, so sorry, but keep a lookout for part 2 because they'll all be in that. Vault 3 was one of the few control vaults that was not subject to any kind of experimentation. Dwellers in this vault lived in peace for decades until the onset of a substantial water leak, forcing those inside to open the vault to find help. In the initial weeks that Vault 3 was opened, they established a number of relationships with surrounding communities and developed multiple trade agreements. However, this caught the attention of the raider tribe known as the Fiends, bloodthirsty savages known for their intense chem addiction. These raiders infiltrated Vault 3 and massacred all of the inhabitants, claiming the vault as their own. Vault 8 was another control vault that saw great prosperity after opening to the surface in 2091. Vault 8 utilized their GECK, or Garden of Eden creation kit, to terraform and settle the surrounding area and found Vault City, one of the largest and most technologically advanced settlements in northern Nevada. While functionally a control vault, it was still under observation from the Enclave and Vault-Tec, practically functioning as a test to see how well the Enclave could settle and colonize an area using a vault as a base of operations. Vault 11 operated under a social experiment where once every year, the inhabitants would have to sacrifice one of their own members or risk everyone else in the vault being killed. The dwellers developed an annual election system where a new overseer would be elected each year and at the end of their term be forced to submit to execution. Vault 11 elections were a strange inverse of the standard ones we're used to. Instead of promoting the great qualities of a candidate, people would utilize propaganda and smear tactics to make a candidate look as bad as possible. The only individual who knew of these sacrificial requirements was Vault 11's original overseer. When it came time to select the first sacrifice, the dwellers were furious with the overseer for not informing them of this situation before the vault was sealed, resulting in the original overseer becoming Vault 11's first sacrifice. Elections continued over the next 16 years, with a number of voting blocks rising to power within the vault. The electoral process quickly devolved into corruption as time went on. In the lead up to what would become Vault 11's final election, members of the Justice Bloc used, we'll just say, extremely inappropriate coercion tactics on Vault resident Catherine Stone, threatening to nominate her husband Nathan if she were to refuse their advances. In the end, the Bloc elected Nathan regardless, forcing Catherine to murder a number of Justice Bloc members in retaliation. As a result of her murders, Catherine was swiftly elected to be the next overseer of Vault 11. In her first act as leader, she abolished the election system and mandated that all future sacrifices would be chosen at random through the Vault's computer system. Fearful they would lose what power they had in the Vault, the remaining Justice Bloc members staged an insurrection against the rest of the Vault, igniting a blaze of bloodshed and violence that lasted until only 5 dwellers remained. The final 5 survivors of Vault 11, demoralized by the years of senseless violence, refused to offer a sacrifice to the Vault computer. Expecting to be terminated for their disobedience, the survivors were horrified to discover that their commitment to human life would be rewarded and that none of them would be killed. Disgusted to learn that all of the sacrifices were for nothing, the remaining 5 discussed what they should do with themselves. 4 of them wished to end their own lives, ridden with guilt for what had occurred inside the vault, while 1 wanted to leave and spread the word about the atrocities that went down inside the vault. Sadly, even in their final moments, the inhabitants of Vault 11 could not escape violence, with the solitary survivor mercilessly killing the other 4 who wished to atone for their sins. As the bombs fell during the onset of the Great War, residents of the city of Bakersfield rushed to find safety inside Vault 12. However, instead of protecting the inhabitants from the sudden storm of radiation, Vault 12's door did not close behind them. What seemed like an unfortunate malfunction was, in truth, malicious intent. The door to Vault 12 was never intended to close, and the vault was never intended to protect those within it. The entire shelter, if you can even call it that, was a controlled area where the Enclave and Vault Tech could monitor the effects of radiation on a large number of people. Those who weren't immediately killed by the influx of radiation underwent the agonizing process of ghoulification. In 2083, the survivors of Vault 12 would leave their pitiful excuse for a shelter and set out on the wasteland on their own. Many left the city of Bakersfield to forge their own paths, while those that remained transformed their former home into the new city of the dead, known as Necropolis. The following year, a savage ghoul known as Set forcefully took control of Necropolis, ruling the ghoul stronghold with an iron fist. His brutal nature caused a schism in the ghoul community of Necropolis. Many ghouls who strive for peace oppose Set's ways, electing to live underground to avoid his bloodthirsty rule. While it was one of the supposed few control vaults, Vault 13 was also subject to experimentation. Primarily, Vault 13's focus was on the preservation of American life, but it was also used to test the longevity of multiple Vault Tech technologies. Inhabitants of Vault 13 remained isolated until a chip failure for their water purifier forced them to send out one of their own into the wasteland to find another chip. The now legendary Vault Dweller returns to Vault 13, only to have the Overseer banish him from the vault entirely. To the Overseer, he feared that the other Vault 13 inhabitants would attempt to tackle the wasteland on their own in a futile attempt for fortune and glory, just as the Vault Dweller did. The rest of Vault 13 was furious at the Overseer's decision and staged an uprising that ultimately resulted in the Overseer's death. The inhabitants of Vault 13 lived in relative peace for around 80 years until the vault was stormed by Enclave troops. Those who weren't killed in the ensuing firefight were taken prisoner and transported to the Enclave oil rig off the coast of California. To cover up their assault, the Enclave sent a pack of highly intelligent Deathclaws to take over Vault 13. These Deathclaws did not follow the orders given to them by the Enclave and eventually established their own community within Vault 13. Sadly, the Enclave deemed the Deathclaws to be too much of a security risk and had them wiped out. Akin to Vault 11, Vault 15 was another social experiment where a number of drastically different cultures and ideologies were mixed together in the same confined area to test how quickly they would succumb to chaos. With clashing ideals already a major problem in Vault 15, day-to-day functions of the vault were severely mismanaged, resulting in extremely poor living conditions and rampant overpopulation. By 2097, the situation reached its apex, and the fragile society of Vault 15 quickly collapsed. A majority of the dwellers stripped the vault of the best equipment and ventured out in the wasteland, while a small number stayed behind to live on what was left. These remaining dwellers stayed in Vault 15 until it was invaded by raiders sometime later. The most prominent of the Vault 15 exiles used the vault's Gek to found the village of Shady Sands, while others formed distinct raider gangs known as the Khans, Jackals, and the Vipers. Eventually, the NCR took over the vault to salvage and excavate what remained in its ruins. This spiraled into a major conflict between the NCR, various scavengers, and other different raider groups. When another excavation project arose, the NCR abandoned Vault 15 as well, leaving it to be claimed by a group of wasteland squatters. After returning to reclaim Vault 15 once more, the squatters stopped the NCR. They argued that the vault was their home, and in secret, the squatters were actually working with the raider clan known as the New Khans, who were providing the squatters with food and water in exchange for their servitude. Eventually, a deal was brokered between the squatters and the NCR after the leader of the new cons, Darien, was killed by the Chosen One, the protagonist of Fallout 2. In return, the NCR offered the squatters food, water, shelter, and education, giving them the means to survive, as well as giving the NCR a stronger presence in the wasteland. Being one of the most mysterious vaults in the entire wasteland, not much is known about the history of Vault 17. Through stories told by Lily Bowen, a character in Fallout New Vegas, we learn that at some point the vault was invaded by the Unity, an army of super mutants led by a highly intelligent mutant known as the Master. They captured a number of the vault's inhabitants, forcefully turning them into mutants for the Master's army. Lily never mentions having any negative experiences inside Vault 17, so it's possible this was one of the very few control vaults. Or it's quite possible that she was completely unaware of any nefarious deeds going on inside Vault 17. Within the halls of Vault 19, inhabitants were divided into two different sectors known as the Blue Sector and the Red Sector, with each one kept completely segregated from one another, in addition to each sector being led by its own overseer. In the Vault experiment, both sectors were subject to various degrees of paranoia induced through explicitly non-chemical and non-violent means. This included the use of subliminal messaging and various vault malfunctions. Members of each sector quickly began to blame members of the opposite sector for these disturbances inside the vault. In reality, it was actually the vault's twin overseers that were implementing these disturbances at the direction of Vault Tech. The ultimate fate of the Vault 19 dwellers is unknown, as by the time the vault is discovered by Wastelanders, it had been completely abandoned. Vault 21 presented its inhabitants with one of the more benign experimental situations. Any disputes that were to arise within the vault would be settled entirely through gambling and games of chance. Surprisingly, tensions in Vault 21 never rose to a boiling point, and its unique dynamics kept all dwellers on an even social playing field. After the revitalization and rise of New Vegas sometime around 2274, the enigmatic Mr. House contacted Vault 21 to give them an opportunity to return to the surface. Dwellers of the vault were split on whether or not they should agree to House's deal. So, following the traditions of the vault, they settled their dispute over an extremely lengthy game of blackjack. In the end, the Vault 21 residents agreed to Mr. House's offer and left the vault to return to the surface. Initially, House planned to fill the vault with concrete and just seal it off entirely, but former residents Sarah and Sheldon Wintraub convinced House to renovate the vault into a hotel for his growing city. And now, the Vault 21 Hotel and Shop is one of the most notable attractions on the gleaming New Vegas Strip. Unlike many of the other vaults, Vault 22 did not house a standard civilian population, rather being entirely inhabited by scientists employed by Vault Tech directly. Within the walls of Vault 22, these bright minds worked with various forms of experimental plants in an attempt to create crops and other vegetation that could survive in the wasteland of a post-nuclear America. Operations went smoothly within Vault 22 for years, until they received a sample of spores from fellow researchers at Big Mountain. These spores were originally developed as a form of pest control, similar to the cordyceps fungus. They would infect the host body of the pest, slowly growing and killing it from the inside out, eventually assuming full control of the host's motor functions. What the Vault 22 researchers were unaware of, however, was that the spores were completely capable of infecting a human host. The spores quickly spread through the vault like wildfire, infecting a large number of the research staff and transforming them into mindless beasts known as spore carriers. These carriers were extremely aggressive and existed only to further the spread of their fungal growth. It wasn't long before the fungus took over the vault, and by 2096, Vault 22 was completely abandoned. Another fairly simple vault was Vault 29. As per its experiment, it was to be only inhabited by children from predominantly wealthy families, with no dweller being older than 15 years old. As this vault is only briefly mentioned in a holotape in Fallout 76, not much is known about Vault 19.
At this rate, I'm gonna end up shipped out to the West Coast to work as a janitor in 29 with a bunch of obnoxious rich teenagers or something.
With it being ran entirely by kids, one can really only assume the worst, but with the success of similar settlements like Little Lamplight, it's entirely possible the vault saw a very prosperous future. In an extremely dangerous premise, residents of Vault 34 were supplied with a large assortment of weapons and ammunition. Immediately sensing the harm that could arise from the situation, Vault 34's overseer installed a remote lock to the armory on their personal terminal. A number of dwellers began to demand access to the armory, arguing that they should be able to use the weapons to defend themselves. Seeing no reason for it, the overseer refused, resulting in a large number of vault residents leaving Vault 34 sometime around 2231. These deserters would actually go on to found the fiercely territorial tribe known as the Boomers that would make their home in the abandoned Nellis Air Force Base. Soon after, a number of issues began to arise inside Vault 34, namely a severe issue with overpopulation. The Overseer attempted to implement a number of population control measures, but these were all met with opposition from the other Vault residents. Major riots eventually broke out inside Vault 34, with a number of people storming the Vault's armory. Many areas of the Vault were damaged in their rampage, including the main power reactor and the Vault's main door. Now trapped within Vault 34, large amounts of radiation began to leak all through the Vault, killing or ghoulifying many of the remaining residents. Vault 51 was unique in the fact that it was not led by a traditional overseer. Instead, a ZAX 1.3C supercomputer built with an advanced AI was placed in the leadership role of Vault 51. But instead of doing any actual governing, ZAX was programmed to select a leader from the Vault's 52 residents. One of the residents, a Sergeant Robert Baker, was assigned to help ZAX with this mission. At first, Baker suggested that ZAX select a new overseer through the most democratic way possible, a standard election. Multiple elections were done, with each one failing to select a new overseer. Because of these failures, ZAX determined that elections were worthless in deciding a leader and pressed Baker for a new course of action. The sergeant then suggested that the best quality of a leader was a person who would rise up in times of crisis. Following Baker's suggestion to the letter, ZAX set up a number of high-stress situations to test the dwellers of Vault 51. At first, these were relatively minor, such as changing the rules of a talent show halfway through the event, where the losers would be forced to give up their bedrooms and sleep in bunks. But they quickly became more dangerous, like setting off the alarms while inhabitants slept, manipulating dwellers to cheat on their partners, and even manufacturing a food shortage. Tensions soon became too much for the dwellers, and instead of rising above their situation, they devolved into reckless violence. Soon all but one dweller would be left alive, a man named Reuben Gill. ZAX placed him as the de facto overseer of the entire vault. But since there was no one in the vault to actually oversee, Gill's performance as overseer was quite poor in the eyes of ZAX. Anxious to finally be free from ZAX's captivity, Gill hacked the vault's inventory manifest and placed himself inside an outbound shipping container. Gill eventually escaped the confines of Vault 51 and actually made contact with a dweller from Vault 76, but he was killed before he was able to return to Vault 51 and shut down the ZAX AI. Vault 63 is perhaps one of the most mysterious vaults in the entire history of Fallout, mainly because it has remained completely sealed from the rest of the outside world. While a terminal located near the entrance of Vault 63 lists its status as normal, nobody truly knows what is actually going on inside Vault 63. As to what Vault 63 will contain is yet to be seen. To give refuge to children in the event of war, Vault 75 was constructed underneath Malden Middle School in the Commonwealth, though that was the reason that was stated publicly. In reality, this vault was the testing grounds for a number of genetic modification programs targeted at the children within Vault 75. The ultimate goal of this was to eventually create a generation of genetically superior humans that would likely have been conscripted by the Enclave into their new government. While in the vault, the children were taught that they would receive rigorous physical and mental training so that they would one day venture out into the wasteland and save innocent lives. That was far from the truth. Physically exceptional subjects would actually undergo an unspecified genetic harvesting, while those with high intelligence were recruited into the Vault 75 science team. While details are hazy on the exact outcome of Vault 75, it is believed the children staged a rebellion against the Vault leaders with the help of an unknown scientist. Arguably one of the most important vaults in the entire wasteland, Vault 76 housed the best and brightest America had to offer. Inhabitants here would be granted exceptional living conditions and undergo extensive training so they could one day return to the surface and begin rebuilding America in an event known as Reclamation Day. The vault was revealed to the public on 2076, the year of the United States Tricentennial. In accordance with the momentous occasion, A massive opening ceremony was held to ring in the newly constructed vault. Being one of the few control vaults, operations inside Vault 76 went smoothly for the next 25 years until it was opened in 2102. In her personal logs, the Overseer noted how easy it was to maintain order inside Vault 76, mainly thanks to the esteemed pedigree of its inhabitants. But it was this same pedigree that also caused a number of minor conflicts and disagreements. To help settle this, the Overseer devised a number of competitions in which the dwellers could compete. These would help settle disputes and quell the larger egos of the more insufferable Vault 76 inhabitants. Over the years, many Wastelanders concocted a number of theories as to what went on inside Vault 76. Many assumed, correctly, that the dwellers lived a cushy lifestyle of peace and tranquility, while others assumed the vault held treasures beyond comprehension, which led a number of settlers and raiders to the region of Appalachia not long after Vault 76 opened. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. This is my first time really doing any kind of lore or storyline explanation video, so this is kind of a new undertaking for me, and hopefully I did a decent enough job. This was kind of a bigger project than I initially expected it to be. Part of the reason why it's ended up being 2 parts, so look out for that soon. And hey, if you don't want to miss it, be sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you can find that second part when it comes out, and so you don't miss any of my other videos. And let me know what you thought of the video down in the comments below. Thank you again so much for watching. Again, I hope you enjoyed, and can't wait to see y'all again in the next one. So thank you and take care.